Welcome to the participants in the webinar from the Learning Spaces Collaboratory, Making the Case for Active Learning Classrooms, the experience of the University of California, Berkeley. It has been a pleasure to get to know Brenda Farmer virtually, since she's connected to the Learning Spaces Collaboratory through the last several webinars and through sharing her experiences. And then I thought this was a wonderful contribution to the series of LSC webinars on classrooms. Brenda has, well, she'll tell you her story, but she's part of the technology staff at Berkeley. She can give you her resume. And she has been working for at least many years, but more specifically since 2009, with kind of transforming the physical learning environment at Berkeley to be more conducive to adopting new 21st century pedagogies and engaging 21st century pedagogies. So we have 4 parts for the agenda: where they are now, how they got started, why they got started, how they got to where they are from where they were, and then some lessons learned. And as usual with the LSC webinars, there's always a time and place for questions. We have 4 of those throughout the webinar. If you should have questions in the context of Brenda's presentation, please enter them into the chat room and send to all, and then both Brenda and I will have time to look at them, and we'll insert them right at that moment or at the point of questions. So everyone is muted. That avoids the kind of ambient noise that makes it difficult to hear the words of the presenter and to examine the stories with great elegance. So I'm now going to turn it over to Brenda, and she's going to talk about I'll introduce the learning outcomes that people on the call on the webinar will understand the process that Berkeley went through and figure out how their steps and stages and what they did and how they reflected on the process got them to where they are today. They have arrived at some very elegant and descriptive characteristics of the 21st century learning spaces and have engaged the broader Berkeley community in that exploration. And then for all of us on the webinar, it's always important to extract lessons learned that can help shape the learning on individual campuses and with architects. We have a lot of architects on the call, as they talk to clients or potential clients about what works in reimagining the 21st century classroom. So I'm now going to turn it over to Brenda, and I welcome you to the call.
Okay, just have to get myself oriented here. We're going to start with directly speaking to what we put together as characteristics of a desirable learning space. And each of these I'll speak to a little bit more. I think overall it helps kind of frame our thoughts about the planning of an active learning classroom, as well as keeping in mind the end users, you know, the faculty and the students. So we'll speak to each of these. To begin with, oops, I think I went too fast. Let's see. Yeah, okay. To begin with, I want to welcome you to what is fondly called the Test Kitchen, or Dwinell 127. And it is a relatively new space. We've been in there for 3 semesters now. This semester we have 8 classes. So we're really, and the 8 classes are from a variety of different disciplines, and that's really important to keep in mind. Most of the time when people come into the space, the first thing they comment on, or I think what brings the room into light, are actually 3 very large windows. And so we get a lot of natural light. People look around, they look at the furniture. Most students and instructors, you know, that's the first thing they do. They come in, they look, and they go, huh, you know, let's see what we can do in this space. So it's very important, those first impressions. It was not an easy start in terms of getting the room to what it looks like today. The infrastructure, as you know, is really important and is a struggle when you're dealing with older architecture. Grinnell is not a new building. I love going to new buildings and seeing what they've done. You know, usually things are hidden under raised floors, etc. But in this case, you'll see in the diagram some black lines underneath the carpet. That's where the rebar is. So we had to go in and actually x-ray the floor to make sure the places where we cored into the floor were not going to interfere with the structure of the building. And it was an experience, let's put it that way. So, and the reason why we felt, and I could have done a lot of different things in this space, I wanted to keep the peripheral of the room clear so that we didn't have cords going to the walls. So it became really important to put the cords strategically in places along the floor. And it is actually probably because of all the classes now that are coming into this space where instructors are actually asking students to bring laptops. So it became really important for us to continue following that line of instruction. The other thing that I think is really important besides power and making sure you have enough power, and that's, you know, that it's being able to connect to the internet. You know, you need wireless networking in order to be really efficient in these spaces. We're lucky in the campus. We have air bears. That's what we call it. It's pretty much throughout the campus. There are some hot spots in terms of once in a while you'll find students sitting in a hallway somewhere and you'll know that it's faster there. The internet is working faster there. But for the most part, we haven't had any problems in this space in terms of people connecting. And we actually have, in this picture right here, we have a social media class. And everybody is required to have laptops. We're on the internet all the time. So it wouldn't be successful without having that, the network available. And in terms of writing spaces, this is a really important element of any classroom. I didn't have a whole lot of money for renovations, and so I had to really kind of prioritize what I thought was going to be very important for the space. And ideally, I would have loved to put kind of like a glass board as a writing surface along the three walls of the room, but I decided when I started looking around on what's called the huddle board, and it turns out to be probably the #1 factor in what faculty like the most about this space is the ability to for students to capture thoughts, for faculty to use as a parking lot. They're portable, they're lightweight, they're easy to move around, and it turned out to be probably the best engagement tool in the space. And I have a few more slides about this later on. After the first semester, we had only a couple of classes in there. We had not fully added all the technology. And I surveyed the students. And they came up with these comments for me to share with everybody. The first class that we brought into the space was a college writing class, and the instructor was unsure if she wanted to teach in the space or not. And she invited her class to come and come into the room and compare it to the other class that she had already scheduled. And as soon as we started a conversation with the students, and I asked them if they were walking into the space, what grabbed them? And one student said the very first thing was, this is the first time I've been able to actually see the students in face-to-face instead of seeing the backs of them. And it was that comment that the professor decided, just based on that alone, that she wanted to experiment and try teaching teaching in the classroom. It was a big leap for her. She had never taught in a collaborative space. She had all her curriculum already designed for a straight lecture mode, and it was, for her, she had to really sit down and talk about it. She had conversations with her students. I had conversations with her as well about what kind of activities she could change and actually, benefit the use of the room. And it was a fun process to work with her. Let's see, are there any questions, Jean, from that end?
We have unmuted now, so people can speak their questions. Let me start with two questions, Brenda. One
Yes.
is that, if I'm remembering right from our conversation, those windows were something new in the renovation.
Yeah, in the original design of the space, and I think we have a slide at some point showing that it was a video conferencing or a distance ed class. So even in this picture here, you can see that the room has acoustic panels, and those panels were on all 4 walls. And when I got the okay from the campus to find a space, design a space, and I got the blueprints. I had to hunt those down because they were not yet digited. They weren't available on through CAD. I rolled out the plans, and the first thing I saw was that we had closed over 3 windows. So there were, the windows weren't available. They were totally closed. You didn't know they were there. It was, a fairly quiet room, but I knew right away in order to bring the room, to bring life into the room, I had to remove that wall. And that was a huge undertaking, overall, but it was worth every minute of it. We had to refurbish the windows as well to get them to open again. But it really changed the whole dynamics of the room. And I've had other faculty come into the space now who knew the room before as a video conference space and say, well, wait a minute, these weren't here. Is this the same room? It totally transformed the room. In this picture,
we have 2 questions. Janet, do you want to ask your question?
Sorry, we were on mute. Are the huddle boards hard surfaces or paper pads? It's hard to tell from the picture.
Okay. The huddle board, there's a frame, and then they're actually like whiteboards. And they come in the same size. They come kind of like with a metal easel that you can put them on, and then they get stored underneath there. And you can write on both sides. So they're actually whiteboards on both sides. And they're light. So they're not, if I were putting whiteboards on the wall, for example, I would do something that's more enamel over steel based because they have a really nice finish and they clean up well. So these are not high-end whiteboards, but because they're so light and portable, they really work well. So, and I can't tell you enough how many comments, it's usually the first comment I get about, I might get a complaint at first where an instructor will say, well, where are the chalkboards? Because Berkeley is culturally a chalkboard school. We're only starting to put whiteboards in. And when I show them how you can take the whiteboard and you can write on both sides, and you can also hang them on the walls. In this picture, you do see a railing behind the person who's standing up, and I have rails on the other 2 sides of the room. So those whiteboards can hang on the rail, and there's a double rail so that you can move them on top of each other as well.
And let me invite Nate to ask his question.
Sure.
Yes, hi. Can you talk about what the square footage of that room is, what its size is, and then how many it seats?
Okay, I can't quite remember the square footage. You can send me an email and I can send that to you. Right now, we limit the seating to 32 seats. Okay, this is actually a very good question because it brings up all kinds of issues around capacity in general assignment classrooms and how rooms are scheduled based on enrollment. And I think that that is one of the hardest pieces to bring to the registrar's office, to bring to a department's office when they already have ideas about, I have to have 50 people in here. I capped it at 32 when I started working with different vendors and furniture, looking at how the rooms could be laid out and how much space was available to both the instructor and the students if they're in a room. And easily I've had people come in and say, well, it's a process. You have to apply to teach in this classroom. First of all, it is part of our department, but I open it up to general assignment classes. So I'll get an instructor who comes in there to look at it, who wants, to check out the room, see what attributes are there and how it might work. And they'll say, oh, okay, well, I have a 45-seat class. It'll be fine in here. And I have to immediately say, no, I'm sorry. We have 32 seats and an instructor's chair, and that's it. We don't allow extra chairs to be brought in. So the enrollment is capped at 32, and you can have less than that as well. So I encourage, I'm trying to get the campus to think about having, spaces like this where we're not packing the seats in like sardines, more or less, where you get as many people as possible. Otherwise, that collaboration piece, it doesn't happen. It can't work.
Johnson, do you have a question?
Was that Susan? Yes, the question is, why flat panel displays rather than a projected image?
Well, as I said earlier, this is a test kitchen. So there are going to be lessons learned on both sides. We kept the large screens in there. There's actually 4. In this picture that you see now, it was before all the technology was added. So 2 monitors were added to the back of the room, as well as what you would call the front, where the windows are. We like the idea of students being able to turn and look at the different monitors. However, I have gotten feedback that faculty would like the option of having a data projector with a large screen in the room. So I do have one instructor right now who, in the space, we can also check out portable AV equipment. So for his class, he's got a 4-hour class in there. And he uses the monitors and the large screen projector. And the reason why is it really depends on the kind of media, the kind of data that you're showing. Some people are okay with a smaller monitor, and they can park their learning management site there, or they can have some graphics on another monitor. Whereas on the large screen projector, and it's about an 8-foot screen that we have, I think, in there that he puts up. He's in public policy, and he does a lot of Excel and data crunching. And so they're showing different laptop students are connecting, and it was easier for him to show that kind of data on a larger screen. And so I would probably have both in there. And it's on my to-do list, my wish list.
We have a few more questions, and then we have to move on, or we could go on for a couple of hours here. Jeremy Todd from the University of Minnesota asked about what you meant by student-owned learning. when you said the student.
I'm sorry, what was that?
If you can read it in the chat room. Jeremy, I'm sorry, I'm taking over. Student ownership of their learning, and wondered what you meant by that and what evidence you have that the spaces encourage it. Okay, well, what happens in this space, and you know, part of the in the beginning when I was setting this space up, I decided the only way that I would be able to learn as well would be if I was able to observe what's going on in the classroom. So what we've done is I set it up so that I visit the room and the classes fairly often. And in the course of doing that, what I've seen is that, especially with these huddle boards, what happens is the students, depending on the activity that the instructor is having them collaborate on, the students take the whiteboards, these boards, the huddle boards, and they actually go to their individual tables or they're working at the huddle board, and they're you know, they're writing their ideas, their concepts, they're collaborating together, and then they come back and they share this. So, but the ownership is that, you know, what you actually see happen is that students will begin to write things up, and then people will start presenting. Then students will get up and they write over it or they change it. I've seen students go up to their whiteboard and actually take pictures of it, and they use it later on for their work on other projects. So it's pretty remarkable when you're there in person seeing this happen, because normally you're not going to see any of this. You're not going to see the activities that are happening and the dialogue that's going on, and how much of it is about the students themselves and what they're doing and what they're creating. I hope that answers your question. We're going to have it be answered because I know you're going to come up. So why don't we move on, and Amy, can we hold? Amy and Deb, can we hold? Well, let's ask Deb. How expensive was it to take x-rays of the floor?
You know, I didn't get a, that's a good question. I didn't get an itemized bill. You could say I worked with a campus group that actually did a lot of the physical work in the space. I mean, it was complicated. Even those cutouts in the floors, the monuments, they had to meet fire life safety code and had the fire marshal to approve them. So I can't tell you exactly, but I can probably go back and find out, and you're more than welcome to email and ask me. I think also, depending on the size of the floor, once we had decided where we wanted the cutouts in the floor, it wasn't like they had to do the whole floor. We just had to do a certain area. It's a good question, because it becomes a big issue when you compromise the deck below or underneath the two floors. And we just knew that we had to find some kind of a solution for the power.
Thank
you.
So
Brenda, why don't we move on to the next session? I'm going to ask Amy and the other two, we think that who had questions, to hold their questions to the next time after they've seen a little bit more about your work, the process, and the catalyst. So the ball's in your court.
Okay, so this is a test kitchen. This is another example of a class that's in there. You see the two large monitors there. They both have different images on them. It is an older building. There are 50 GA classrooms here. Our department is in this building, and so the reason it helped us make the decision to put this classroom in where our home department is, because it had allowed us to do hands-on support immediately if there were any troubles. It made it easier for me to participate in the classes themselves and work with instructors. It put faculty at ease in terms of, well, this is a new space, I've never taught this way before, and they know that we're right downstairs. Our main offices are downstairs. It was actually strategically a really good idea to do it that way. So this is the room, this is how it started in 1995. It's a distance ed class, video conferencing. It was very popular back then. If you compare those room attributes or characteristics of the room to what this one looks like now, you know, there's no, everything is fixed. The room is very gray and light colored, which is pretty typical in a video conferencing space to keep it neutral. There's more than enough lighting. We didn't need as much lighting. And also, those lights created a lot of heat, so the room became quite warm. It didn't have the same kind of ventilation. The furniture is fixed, etc. And we just thought that this would be the perfect space to do it in. The campus and the leadership was behind us. They helped fund it. And the other issue was that with video conferencing, more and more people are doing web conferencing from their desks, like what you're doing now. We didn't have the same call for these kind of large example events. And not only that, if you can tell at the front of the room, on the left-hand side of the picture, there's like a workbench. So the instructor was stuck behind this big bench where all their laptop was, and they lectured from there. And then on the right-hand side, you can't quite see it, there's an operator's station. So this room actually required staffing. It got to be very expensive for us to continue in that vein as well, and it just wasn't utilized. So it was time to move on. So this is a picture of what the room looked like from the very beginning.
Brenda, go back one.
Okay.
Remembering one of the student comments was that so many of our rooms look like rooms in a prison.
Well, it's pretty great, you know, and it's absolutely true. I mean, we have a lot of rooms where, you know, and in this room, it's that 45. So they really crunched the chairs in here. So, and like I said, now I have 32. So thanks for reminding me. The Moffett Library was really a good starting point for how we got to Dwinell, our test kitchen. And the library in 2009 decided to look at the overall building. They wanted to evaluate, you know, what was working or what wasn't working. There was a huge capital projects movement to revitalize the space. So the library's goal basically stated that they wanted to offer vibrant teaching spaces in the Moffett general assignment classroom. And the renovation goal was to accommodate diverse and evolving range of learning modalities. So we had, you know, the vice provost behind it, the vice chancellor, and the various entities on campus who would bring this to fruition. So it really was a big step for the campus, you know, top down to actually say, let's move ahead. We want this. We want to move forward. And actually, the next couple of pictures you're going to see are pictures that are from the Moffett Library. So we had 4 general assignment classrooms in there. That prison term comes to mind again. Between the 2 doors back there, you'll see it's a slide projection booth. You know, we don't even have slide projectors anymore, a really old, dated technology. But we began the process in 2009, and we really spent a good deal of time interviewing faculty, taking them to lunches, having focus groups. And, you know, it all became apparent that, you know, we had to look at the HVAC ventilation in these rooms. The lighting was awful. There are no restrooms on this floor where there are 4 general assignment classrooms. The elevators, the path of travel, ADA access, the only place for a student with a disability to sit is in the back of the room. So it had all kinds of issues in the building. And when the architect actually came along and started, here's a diagram of you know, what the space looks like now. It's like being in the basement. I was there yesterday. I went to take some pictures of the space, trying to track path of travel issues. And it's, you know, your cell phones don't work down there. You're very isolated. So it's a very, it's an expensive kind of investment overall, but when it came down to it, the campus realized that that expense was only going to add, if we were going to make active learning spaces, was only going to add 10% to the overall building cost. And so they said, okay, let's do this. We're gonna hire the architects to redraw even the classroom floor plan and come up with a variety of different drafts. And that's what we did. And, you know, the faculty feedback about these spaces when we interviewed them and talked to them was that they wanted movable and flexible furniture, and they were all for, you know, trying out new types of learning spaces. And they also needed and wanted help with designing their curricula around how to teach in these spaces and how to improve their teaching practice. And, you know, clearly they were very unsatisfied with the current state of affairs of classrooms. They didn't, you know, they said the seats were uncomfortable, the lights, even cleaning in these spaces. No matter how much cleaning you did, they're still sort of dim. And they were definitely all for informal learning spaces, creating spaces where you could informally meet with students, that students could gather, et cetera. And I don't, you know, I don't think that we have enough of those spaces anyway. Usually when we started talking to students about that, they were saying, you know, when you asked them where their favorite learning spaces were, they were usually saying the cafes, not too many places on campus. So, and the students agreed, we have to have informal spaces. They wanted more flexibility in classrooms so that there could be more student-to-student engagement and more interaction between the faculty and the student, the instructor and the student. But when you're in a lecture mode, you can't do that. And then, of course, the students brought up, you know, I bring my laptop, you know, I bring these other handheld devices, and I need power, you know, I need to be able to use them all day. So that became, you know, we heard these things and said, okay, we're going to start looking around, look at other campuses. And Minnesota, you have to leave it to Minnesota. I've been there several times. I've been to both private colleges and university colleges. I make it a point to take pictures wherever I go. Bring your camera with you because pictures really do tell the story. You'll hear more from them next month. The first time I visited them, they only had 2 active learning classes. Now they have a brand new building that I believe has 10 rooms in them. But it goes far beyond when you are used to being in an environment where lecture is how we impart knowledge to the students. When you go into an active learning room and you see how the room is being used, it just totally turns your head around about what kind of spaces should we have here at Berkeley. So it was a real opportunity to go to other campuses and, you know, I just pretend I'm an instructor or a student and walk around. The other thing I think is really important to do, and we don't often do because we take it for granted, is going to, if you're within a larger institute, if you have professional schools on your campus, part of the campus, go visit them. The law school, the School of Education, the business school. It's amazing what other schools can do. Some of them may have more resources, of course, but you go in there and you get ideas, and you walk around and you say, oh yeah, okay, we could do something like this. We might have to scale it down, but it really does help you in that planning process of thinking about what you want to do. And every time I travel, even if it's for a vacation, I try to go to a place where there's a university or a campus of some sort, where I can take pictures and meet with people. So that's really important. And it's really good information to take back to your leaders, to the campus committee on classroom policy and management. You have a meeting, you meet with them, you get your 3 minutes in there, you show them pictures of what other universities are doing, and it really grabs their attention. Should we pause here for any other questions?
We have several questions on hold, and I think let's start with Amy's. Amy, I think you can talk now. You're unmuted.
Yeah, I like the word student safety. Yeah.
Good afternoon. Yeah, I had 3 questions. One, how did you decide upon square versus round tables? The second is, are the students successfully able to charge or live through the classroom duration without having to be charged? Because I know that you've got electrical in the room, but it's not directly accessible. And then the third question is, are the faculty and what disciplines are showing a preference for this room or this layout, so to speak?
Okay, let's go back to the table shape. There's, a variety of ways of thinking about active learning, and there's a variety of different modes that are out there. When at Minnesota, I believe most of their tables are round. They kind of are going after the scale-up model. I chose rectangle tables because I felt like I had more options with how the room could be laid out. And actually, I also designed another room in the Department of Statistics. And in that room, they wanted round tables. Okay, that was over in Evans Hall. It is used exclusively by the statistics department. And I've observed in both rooms. In the room with the round table, they never change it up. The room stays that way. And what I have seen there is, even if it's a small class, the instructors, the students will spread out, or the instructors do not fold the furniture up and nest it. In this space, because it is so fluid by nature and really easily, you can nest the furniture. I've seen people who come in there and they will either set the room up differently. It just seems like I had more options with the rectangular table. So that's the main reason I went that way, and I would probably do it again. So, but it might depend. It might depend on the discipline, too. Everybody has their own kind of culture, so it does depend on the clients that you're working with. The battery life of the laptops, it depends on the length of the class. One of the things that I offer in this space is I do not conform to the usual 50-minute or an hour-and-a-half long class. I allow people to teach outside of the normal range of structured time, and I'm hoping at some point that the Berkeley campus will offer more of these opportunities for classes. So like I said earlier, I have one class that's in there for 4 hours, and we do connect power in the floors and have, the students do connect. In other classes, you're right, they don't need to power up at all. And what we're seeing in Dwinell Hall, for example, we have very large hallways in this building. And we were able to renovate the hallways a year ago and put in chairs, fixed chairs, and power behind the chairs, so students could, in their off time, power up. So as long as there's a place to to plug in at some point. I think that's still really important. As far as the disciplines, wow, I'm all over the map. I have a physics class in there. I have public policy. I have a dance and theater class. I've had a mechanical engineering class, college writing. It seems to be language. I have my first language class in there, Chinese. It seems to be all over the board. It doesn't, because it's an application process, people just apply. I'm getting everybody. I haven't, of course, if you're in a professional school, you want to be in your own school. So there is that. But I've gotten all sorts of classes in here, and so far I can't nail down, you know, one discipline over the other.
Deb, you want to make your comments?
Sure. Yeah, I noticed that you have a chair rail in here, and I think that's a really good thing to point out because things are moved around so much, the walls can get damaged. So if there's drywall in particular, wall guard or chair rail is a great idea.
And actually in our general assignment classrooms, we have started doing that in all the rooms. And the chair rail can be as, you know, narrow as 6 inches to a foot. And I think the wider, without it looking too awkward or making too strong of a statement, is good because your chair styles change and the backs of them change. And if you're in a room that has a lot of chairs where they really are packing you in, you are going to be hitting, you know, the walls. So that is a really good point. I've seen it in other spaces on campus where it's not a classroom, it's the athletic study center, and they didn't put chair rails up in their walls, and their walls are just getting eaten away. And it's a really simple, clean thing to do. So I recommend that.
One more question, maybe Susan, but first we'll start with Julie.
I'm not engaged because they are always far, but usually when you have
Can I remind people that if you're talking now, when everybody's unmuted, everybody can hear you. Julie?
Hi. Our question was, what did you mean by the Oprah-style classroom?
What did I mean by the
Oprah-like spaces, that the professors wanted Oprah-like spaces?
And teach from behind one for a while.
Was that in reference to the room that had so many different lighting options in it?
I think it was in one of the tiered rooms that you had a picture.
Oh. They weren't happy with the lights at all. In the tiered room, that was in Moffitt. So I'm not sure if I misspoke, but the lighting was very dim in there, and it just, the rooms were really gray. And what we've started to do on campus is to change out our lighting in other classrooms and buildings as well. In some of those old lecture halls, they also would put in small dimmers so that, for example, in Moffitt, History of Art was using those rooms a great deal. So they wanted students to be able to take notes at the same time, and they wanted the room as dark as possible. I don't feel like that is as essential now because our projectors have very high lumens and they're very, very bright, and for the in most cases, you can just have a simple blind and not worry about light flowing into the room unless it's shining directly onto a screen. Then you really do need to be mindful about your spouse lighting and where your room is in connection to those windows.
I think, Susan, have we neglected you, Susan Monroe?
No, I actually asked my question earlier.
Thank you very much. Why don't we move on then? Oh, David has a question.
Okay.
Why don't you answer David's question, and then we'll move on to the next section.
Okay.
Okay, sure. I'll make it quick. So my question was regarding sharing content. It sounds like a lot of students bring their laptop to class. Do they have an opportunity to push content from their laptop while they're sitting at the tables to one or both of those LCD screens?
They do. And it's not perfect, but we have three different inputs for students to share their content. So you know, there is a training that goes along with the instructors or room orientation, and so we do show them the sort of the stations in the room where other students can connect. And this happens, I'm seeing it more this semester than I did last year, where an instructor, well, someone who perhaps is a little more seasoned and interested, where they get interested in what the students are doing, will say, okay, you know, Jeremy, why don't you, plug in your laptop and show us what you've been working on? Or the public policy teacher, he actually walks around with the cable in the room, and a new tool, but it's an old one. He also carries a laser pointer, and he'll hand that to the student and say, okay, now show me how you got this number, So there is it really helps the engagement to be able to allow students to become part of that presentation, part of that learning process, that teaching process, where they get to show the work that they've been doing. I think that's really important in any kind of collaboration space, that it's not about, again, that one person who's sitting there lecture and pushing information out. Is going in both directions. And I do believe that is a real plus, and I think in our next phase of, if we get another chance to build another room, we'll be doing more of that technology piece where people can switch between sources and show their work.
I just found in your documents, Brenda, the ultralight. And I think they were alluding to this kind of space where there's fluidity and walking around and inviting people to speak and be that kind of area in the classroom. Okay, yes. It's more about how you're using the space. It wasn't I thought you said Oprah light, as in the overhead lights or something. So, yes, it refers to space and for people to be able to move fluidly around the room. Okay, so moving on, as part of that Moffitt project in 2010, we did a huge report to the campus, and these were our guiding principles, or our final conclusions. And would I still do the same thing? Like in here it says, improve one large 80-seat lecture hall. We have the drawings. I don't know if I would do exactly the same thing now based on what I've learned in the last few years, but certainly the commitment is there to move forward, to have more active learning spaces, and they've adopted the general concept. So this is all very exciting. And I have a copy of this in my office, and I often bring it to meetings when we're talking about classrooms to say, okay, don't forget, we have to follow these principles. So I remind people all the time. Space to navigate in the room is probably one of the hardest things that instructors have to deal with when they into an L127. They're amazed at the amount of flexibility, the amount of tools they have. They're very excited about the ability to move and from one group to another, but at the same time, one thing that often get questions about is, but I'm teaching to the backs of students, and then I have to tell them to sit down, and I start walking and moving around the room, and pretty soon they notice that their chair is turning and they're following me. So it is
not easy at first for them to understand that and to be comfortable with that. It does help actually for me to actually work with the instructor to kind of push them to try different teaching scenarios. We have 2 podiums in this room. Sometimes I will move one podium from one side of the room to the other so I can get the instructor kind of clued in that they have options about where they can, you know, if they have a 10-minute lecture and then they open the room up, that they don't have to be in the same place every time. So it is, it's fun for both. I mean, the students, they also encounter the same thing about, you know, oh, wow, I have space. I can put this down here. I can get up. I can stand up. I can write on the wall. So it goes both ways, and it's really important that people experience that. Room layouts, this is just an example of a couple of different classes that were in there. People, when they come into the room, there's no requirement about how the room needs to be set up or that you have to put the room back to the original layout. And I know this is sometimes it's a rub for some people, but it actually in the long run, I think they get used to it. They come into the room, they can either set the room up themselves, or they go, oh, I've never tried this before, this layout. I'm going to try this and try something different. So it's a teaching experience on both sides, and I promote people flexing the room out as often as they want. And we also allow 30 minutes before the start of the class. We give the instructor 30 minutes to actually set up the room, come in. They might want to try different media. They might want to try, oh, I've never displayed 3 different things at one time, and they want to learn how to do that. So we see that as sort of like a training period for them as well to get more acclimated to the space. Get familiar with, I had, you know, one instructor who would come for the first 2 weeks, and she would change the room like 3 times before she would get it just right. But she really needed that time to try those things out. So the room layout, I offer suggestions, but oftentimes after probably 3 or 4 weeks, instructors know what they want to do. And I had one instructor actually who would use the monitors, and he would put up a picture of how he wanted the room to be laid out. And the first students who arrived were the ones who set the room up. Another instructor would draw on the huddle board and say, okay, here's how I want the room set up today. And again, students who came in there first would set the room up. So it's really up to them to be creative and decide how they want to use the space. Huddle boards. Okay, more on the huddle boards. You have 2 different classes here, and it's just fun. I mean, watching the students really kind of take ownership of the boards, and they use them in all different ways. Some instructors will, like I said, will draw the diagrams of the room. They'll post notices. They do small group work. They report, students will report back. They'll walk around the room and look at what other groups have worked on. They'll write additional comments on them. It's just changed the whole dynamic in the space. And I've had instructors say, please, can we get these out in general assignment classrooms? And I hope at some point in the future we'll be doing that. It's enough of a leap to install whiteboards on the wall in many of our classes right now, because, like I said, the culture is more towards chalk and chalkboards, but we're working on that as well. Another picture of the collaboration of people working there. Instructors, I surveyed the instructors at the end of the semester about their experience, and most of them have said if I had more time in there, I would be able to think of more activities. And I think about it. You know, I had one person tell me, I dream about the huddle boards. You know, I think about what I can have my students do ahead of time. So they really take to the ability to start pushing some of this more onto the students, you know, more of the collaboration, more of the learning that can take place between the students and in groups. And, you know, it's interesting when you see the students actually get up after they've written on their board. They actually get up and they scribble down more comments or they erase something. As one instructor told me, she said, in traditional classrooms, in traditional meaning lecture, the instructor owns the chalkboard. You do not see students going up there and saying, oh, you made a mistake, or oh, I want to add this comment. So students actually kind of own their work in this space. And I hadn't thought about that before in terms of a lecture, but when you really do think about it, students aren't really invited. That space belongs to the instructor, you know, to the faculty, that first 5-10 feet in the front of the room. So it's very true, and it changes everything up when all of the walls in the room are being used and people are writing and creating in the spaces. Just quickly about the furniture, I recommend highly that when you are orientating your faculty, even though it seems so obvious that they would know how to fold and nest the furniture, training is very important. Just keep it really simple. There was an earlier question about different sizes of tables, why this, why that. At one point I was thinking of having 3 different table shapes for the space, and then I realized that creates 3 times as much problems when deciding how you're going to set up your room. If you have different shapes and you want one shape or over another, and if it's a right or a left, etc. So I try to keep it simple, right? And it's been very successful. We also provide kind of diagrams in the room of different layouts for faculty to kind of think ahead of time about the activities in space. It is something that they're not used to having that option when they come into a room. So all of a sudden to be told, oh, and you can set the room up the way you want, some of them are like, whoa, that's too much. And so it does take some time for people to really take advantage of the furniture and the space and learn how they can set it up. Again, and just another picture of how the room is set up. I think in general, we take furniture for granted. I know when I started working at the campus, my offices have always come with furniture, or I get hand-me-downs, or you move into a space, or you have rules about purchasing furniture. And I really did spend quite a bit of time researching what's out there, what works, what doesn't work, what I liked. I asked vendors, I invited them to come and bring their products and have people sit and try them out. I went to their showrooms. It's definitely worthwhile to put time and energy into looking at furniture. And we're getting close. Quickly, the technology in here, we have 4 plasma screens. We have a Mac and a PC. We have AMX control, and the one thing you'll see in my hand there is we have an iPad that runs the AMX control as well. So the instructor can walk around the room and not be tethered. They love not being tethered. So that's really important. We have 3 cameras in the room for recording. We have a Blu-ray player, and we offer portable equipment as well. Again, the room, the ambience level, the window treatment, this is all very important to the end user. I have the blinds in there as well as blackout shades. I think that's more of a kind of a psychology in terms of I have to, a throwback to the days when you had to make the room really dark. But I decided it seemed important enough to continue in that vein. This is what the students see when they look out the window. They see the redwoods. This is what's right outside of our building. Any other quick questions?
Why don't you just move on, Brenda, and then we can have questions at the end. I think there's
Okay.
been a lot of questions about lessons learned about working with faculty. So why don't you go through that, and then we'll ask some final questions.
Sure. So with the faculty, it's important to spend time with them and allow them to come together and talk about, the options that they have in these spaces. We have recently opened up the Center for Teaching and Learning, so I'm starting to work with them to help bring more attention to the space, to talk about best practices in these places. I would like to be able to do more with the stipend, and I think that might happen eventually. But the idea is that now that I have 3 semesters worth of investments, I'll be able to bring some of these instructors and faculty together, and they can act as mentors or peers for other people as well. How to market this space, it's really interesting. It seems to be taking off by word of mouth, and it's been great. But I do think that if we want to create more of these spaces on campus, we have to work with departments, we have to work with the higher ups, the deans, et cetera, to say, here's the direction we need to go. We already have, the vice provost and the vice chancellor working with us. When and how do we keep this movement going on campus? And again, top-down and bottom-up leadership is, you have to have it from both ends to be really effective, I think. And we've partnered with the registrar's office, with capital projects, space planning. We've been involved with the custodial services when we start talking about, putting the carpet down, carpet tiles versus linoleum. You take these things for granted, but they really do impact, other people and within the campus. You want to make sure that everybody's on the same page as you go forward. And again, some more comments from students about their impressions of the space and what they've gotten out of that learning space and how it's helped them. So I think we're good to go.
I'm going to, Erin, I think your question is a long one about that, and Brenda's email's at the end of the PowerPoint, so perhaps you could have a conversation about the pros and cons of different kinds of furniture.
Yeah, and actually they can call me at my work office. I am so surprised.
Okay, so Brenda, you get the final word then.
Pardon?
You get the final word.
Yeah, I think that's fine. My number in Berkeley is 510-812-7592. I really do enjoy talking to people about learning spaces. To collaborate on different ideas, it helps me as well. So, but email is great too. So either or. If I don't answer my phone, I'm in a meeting.
So we're returning to where we began about the characteristics of your spaces. So have you touched on everything here?
I believe, for the most part, I think the very last one, maintenance and support, is very important. And again, I think that's easy to kind of dance around. You can't just create a space and not be part of the consequences. We have staff here that help support, they're actually what we call runners. They go out to classrooms when there's some kind of malfunction. We have about 5 classroom support people. They help staff the lecture halls, they do the webcasting, they do orientations, we have a call center. And then we also have a design and engineering team that do our AV installations, our repairs. They also do the programming for the AMX and do special projects. So it's important that you have, you know, ongoing support on all levels. The one thing that I would like to see more of, and that's the instructional designing, working directly one-on-one with instructors, and I'm working on a plan for that now. We do very little of that. We do more of that in the online environment, you know, where your course management system has tools, a variety of things, forums, but I'd like to see, you know, these two areas come together more. We talk about hybrid classes often, so you have to have your physical space and your online space, and it would help that the physical space would complement the online space and vice versa. So I think those two things we shouldn't forget about.
I think you can skip one, and I'll ask my colleagues to join me in, I'm going to get my picture up there now, okay? My colleagues to join me in thanking Brenda. It's been extraordinarily fun to work with her on learning about the program and distilling the lessons learned and best practices. She's opened up my ideas about how good planning happens and about campus-wide attention to learning spaces, as I hope she has all of you. And the next slide then introduces the next webinar, and you've heard some comments from Jeremy, the keyboard, and you also heard from David Territz and his colleague who will be presenting the December LSC webinar. There is Brenda's email address, and we invite your comments back to the LSC too. I remind you that people who register for the webinar will have access to the webinar for some time, so you can revisit it with colleagues. And thank you very much. Goodbye.